Good morning and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today's boardroom talk again is with the outstanding Pat Slattery. And today we are talking about fear and communication. So good morning, Pat, and thanks for coming on again.
Morning, Pete. And you've picked a great topic now because Halloween is coming, right? Is that the kind of fear we're going to talk about?
Absolutely. How we can scare each other. That's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we took two topics and we sort of brought them together, but I think hopefully they're going to set each other off and actually there's going to be a connection between them. So Pat, give us your thoughts on fear and communication.
Yeah, well, I mean, in my opinion, fear is overrated, right? I mean, everybody claims to have it, so it's not that rare, you know. And I often look back and I think about, okay, well, what does fear really mean? And it's how it's communicated, right? I mean, the reality is it's not something you've made up yourself, I mean this respectfully, but we're not that intelligent that we can make all this up ourselves. We have to pick it up somewhere. So somewhere along the way, I believe the fear has been communicated and has been taken on to become a belief or a reality in some cases. So, maybe we'll talk through this. I've made some notes here, and for the people who are listening and watching here, I've made some notes, but let's see where it goes. I may change some of those notes as the conversation goes on and see where we're at. But to be honest with you, I just think the fear, I know for me, that fear was something that was communicated to me, and I'm probably going to share some of my story through today, and maybe get a bit an understanding of what fear is and how we communicate too, in terms of how we communicate fear, but also how can we communicate the ability to be, do, and have anything that you want to be, do, and have. So I don't want to be, I guess, in the same cliche of when people talk about fear or communication. So, or maybe it will be, who knows, right? So. I think what we'll do is when we move on, we talk about fears and talk about different types of fears and different types of communication and how they both affect people in different ways.
But it is, and even just as you're speaking there, I'm sort of struck about the connection, and I mean, we are potentially at a time of fear in some ways. I mean, depending on what way you want to look at it, but also you have to almost be told to be fearful, right? You can't just.
You see, here's you just use the words, you just use the magic word, fearful. Okay, and when you say to me you've been told to be fearful, well, that means you're being told to be full of fear. And for the majority of people, if that message is communicated to you and you're unsure or uncertain of what the world is going to bring, it creates these different thoughts and these different, so-called realities for people. And unfortunately, most people are becoming fearful. I'm going to encourage people today to become fearless. Okay, and I sit here in front of you today, and I believe that I'm fearless. That doesn't mean that I don't have some things that might come across as a fear in certain times, but I'm fearless. I certainly fear a hell of a lot less than I used to fear, and I respectfully, I think for myself a lot more, and I'm very cautious of what I allow to be communicated to me, as well as what I communicate out, if that makes sense. So again, when I said about a fear being overrated, honestly, everyone claims to have it, so it's not really that rare, right? But some people have different fears. So, and I often say to people, if you believe you have fears and you talk about different types of fears, just start sharing it with people and wait and see what happens. You're going to create a serious competition. Okay, if you start sharing, you say, here's something I'm fearful. I have a fear of flying, or I have a fear of spiders, or fear of this, and then all of a sudden, here's what happens. People go, "You think that's bad? Wait till I tell you about mine." Or my Patrick, or my Peter, or my Michael, or and they start telling you all about these other fears, and all of a sudden it starts to create competition. So a lot of people are communicating their fears, and when we think about it, really, you know it creates a whole other sense of feeling and a whole other sense of reality. Now, I'm not dismissing the feeling of reality when somebody is experiencing fear, by the way, because I do understand that when you're experiencing fear, it's very real for people in that moment. But I've been there. I've been there for many, I've had many fears in my life that held me back in my life, but also some of those fears were my driving force. And I guess for me, by telling part of my story, I want to maybe resonate with some people. They can recognize some of their own fears too. And when I've shared these, I've shared these with tens of thousands of people over 26 plus years, and there seems to be a kind of a common denominator. Most people tend to have similar or the same type of fears, and most people, by the way, I've heard them have picked them up from somewhere in their past or different type of stories. So, for me, I was constantly challenging myself based on my fears in the past. You know, we have the fear of loss, the fear of pain. I had the fear of hunger. I had the fear of poverty, fear of debt. You know, but one of my greatest fears was the fear of looking stupid. And it's amazing how many people go through this. And then we hear, you know, obviously of the obvious, the fear of failure, and then we hear people talk about the fear of success. Now, I could go on and on and on with different fears that people come up with, but these are, in my opinion, the most common fears that people communicate. And remember what I'm saying here. These are the most common fears that people communicate. And the more we can communicate these fears, the more the world takes them on as being a reality. So I had to ask myself a question one time, and I'm going to encourage people to ask themselves this question. You know, and it was like, it reminds me actually of a school teacher I had when I was very young, right? As you know, I didn't stay in school too long, so I must have been very young. But I remember saying, coming across about something, and I just remember him standing over me, and I think he was getting out to play football because I was never very good at football, right? I was a great rugby player, I love rugby, but I was never much good at football, or so I believed. And I said to him, I didn't want to play, you know. He said, "Do you want to go on and play?" And I said, "I don't really." He said, "Why?" And I said, I don't really. I'm not really good. I'm not really good at playing football, right?" And he said, "And what's that got to do with it?" I said, "I don't want to go out there looking stupid." He said, "Are you afraid anyone is going to think you're looking stupid?" "Oh yeah." I said, "I have a fear of that." He said, "Oh, how do you know you have it?" And I went, "What?" And for some reason, and the kind of conversation ended there, but it struck something with me. He said, "How do you know you have it? Where did you find it?" I asked myself then. Well, if I have this, where did I find it? Or I had to ask myself, and this was later on in life, and this memory keeps coming up of that question. And I have asked myself many times, who told you that you had this? Who told you you have this fear? Because I didn't make it up, right? So somewhere along the way, this fear was communicated to me. So in what way was it communicated to me? And I'm asking everybody who is paying attention here to maybe ask yourself these questions. How do you know you have it? Where did you find it? Who told you you had it? Or maybe in what way was it communicated to you? So we understand now why fear and communication go hand in hand. Okay. Now we will get talking about the other, you know, the skills of communication skills as we go on, but I really want people to understand this because to me this is very, very important in order to become fearless. And you know, again, when we think about becoming fearless, that's when your life will change. Because for me, I chose then to be fearless. Okay. And most people carry some fears, and they carry a lot of different fears with them, and or concerns or worries. You call it whatever you like. Okay. And most people tend to not go out and fulfill their lives or their dreams based on a fear. Now, everybody's heard the term, you know, that fear equals false expectations appearing real. But maybe we'll try and give a little bit more insight into this, so we get a better understanding of it. But for me, I chose to be fearless. And I remember coming across this quotation, and I have to be honest with you, I searched and searched for it because I found it this morning again because I had it in my head, but I wanted to be clear with it. And a little quotation by Mario Buta. And simple quotation is that dust is a protective clothing for fine furniture. And maybe the fear you're carrying is just the dust, but underneath that fear, there is fine furniture. There is something there that can change your life. They can, you know, give you the opportunity if you can move beyond the fear. Again, when I talk about moving beyond the fear, one of the greatest books I've ever read in my entire life is Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson. If you haven't read it, I highly suggest that people get that book and read the book. But moving beyond the fear and choosing to be fearless, what did that mean to me? And what it really meant to me is actually making the decision that I had nothing to prove to anyone, not even myself. Acceptance was part of moving beyond the fear. Because I had that fear of feeling stupid. I had a fear of being judged. And I think most people have that fear of being judged. I also believe that the one thing that stops people from taking action are what I call the 4 most dangerous words in the English dictionary when you put them together is, what will people think? Because it's the fear of what other people think tends to get in the way of what most people want to do. So, dust off that thought and dig deep, because underneath those thoughts and underneath those fears is fine furniture, right? You can be, do, and have anything you want. And for me, I had to decide I had nothing to prove to anyone, because the fear of not succeeding or not being able to capable, because I made a very bold statement at a very young age that I was going to become a business owner. And as a result of that, let's say I was judged, I was judged, and it didn't make me feel very good. So I had a fear of failure, because failure also made to me that it would, if I failed, it would actually connect with my other fear, was feeling stupid, and the fear of being judged. To the point even I thought about moving away I thought about immigrating. And that's the truth. I actually imagine that fear of feeling stupid or being treated that way, or what other people think, at one time in my life, before I started my business, I thought, best thing for me to do is get on a plane and get out of here and immigrate, running away from the fear. And I realized, no, there's something more. I choose to be fearless, and I have 4 wonderful sons, and I'm really grateful for one of them. Well, I'm grateful for all of them, by the way, just to clarify. But I'm grateful for one story that one of them shared with me one time, because that's when the penny really dropped with me. And my son Keith, he's 24 years old now. I think he was only 8 or 9 years of age, and he shared the story of the story giant with me. And he talked about facing the fears. And, it was a magnificent story, and it really, really resonated with me, and it got me thinking. I remember I was going out the door, I was leaving home, I was going out to do a coaching program on Tuesday evening. I remember sitting in the car, and all of a sudden, that's when I really chose to be fearless. And choosing to be fearless to me was making the decision that I had nothing to prove to anyone, not even myself. I chose to communicate to the world that I am outstanding. Now, again, when you let go of the fear, you got to communicate who you are and what you stand for. And I chose that I had nothing to prove to anyone, not even myself, that I am absolutely outstanding, and therefore I accept that. And I can accept that now without being egotistical. I can accept that as my reality. And when you do that, you change everything. You start becoming fearless. So it didn't mean I was not cautious of certain things, certain behavior, certain people, certain scenarios, but I had a lot less fear. I had a lot less fear about putting myself forward, because I completely stopped judgment, and I stopped allowing other people to judge me. I think we spoke last week, Peter, at one stage, and I mentioned to you, when I became fearless, I also became careless. I could care less of what people think of me. I like people to like me, by the way. I like when I get on exceptionally well with people, and I like making a difference in the world. But I could care less of people's opinions about me. I don't need those opinions. Sorry, my phone is just buzzing, so I'm just going to switch it off. Beg your pardon.
Grand. It's interesting. I mean, and as you're speaking there, I'm kind of struck that the sort of expression that fear is actually a symptom, not a cause. You almost have to. You can't catch it. You can catch the symptoms. You can feel the vibrations of other people's fear, but it's not like you go, God, I got myself a bad dose of fear this week.
Yeah, it's not a thing, right? And it's interesting you say that, because people talk about fear like a physical thing. Now, I understand it is an emotional feeling that creates a physical reaction, right? But I think it was when we were doing a seminar one time, and Donna Kennedy, my partner, was speaking, and we talked about fear and talked about anxiety and different things, and somebody was really holding on to the fear. So she said, "Okay, what if we could remove that fear? Would that be good for you?" The person says, "Yeah, I'd love to remove the fear." Fantastic. Because I'm a surgeon. So let's get you up on the operating table. Let's open you up and let's remove it. And the person went, "What do you mean?" I said, "If you have the fear and you believe the fear is with you all the time, maybe we could remove it, then there wouldn't be a problem anymore." And the person said, "Yeah, but you can't remove it." "Why not?" "Because it's not there. It's not a physical thing. Also, if it's not a physical thing, does it really exist? Or does it only exist in your imagination, in your mind? Or is it a reaction to something you've learned in your past? So if fear is not a physical thing, then what is it? And, more often than not, I believe, this is just my belief and what I think, and I'm not saying it's truth. I ask everybody to question everything. I'm going to share just my opinions. But I believe that it's something that you've picked up in the past, or what we call learned behavior. You've learned how to become fearful. So if you've learned how to become fearful, isn't it true that you could learn how to become fearless? And having fear, to be able to fear less, means less fear in your life to do whatever it is you want to do. Dusting off that protective clothing and finding that fine furniture. So here's what I want people to think about now, actually. Let's think differently. Rather than thinking about fear, think what if. What if you were a master creator? What if you were so good at creating that you could create anything you want from almost nothing at all? What if you were so good at creation that you were famous for it? You were the Olympic medalist of creation. Now imagine getting to that point in your life that you're a master creator. That it got to the point that you're so good at it, it started to become dull. You got bored. You wanted to change something else. Even though you had admiration of the world, by the way, some of which you created, you then began to miss the excitement you felt earlier in life. So I want you to really think about that question. Okay, even though you had admiration of the world, some of which you created, you began to miss the excitement you felt earlier in life. So before you had fear. So what point of your life did fear become part of your reality? Remember, when I often talk to people, people say to me, oh, wouldn't it be great to have that simpler life, the good old days, the way it was before? I remember when I was on top of my game. Remember earlier on in your life, before you had fear, when you were the master creator? And all of a sudden, things start getting in the way. People start to teach you about fear. And all of a sudden they go, be careful now. Be grateful for how far you've got. Once you move beyond that, most people don't succeed. People go through so much pain. People are being messed about every single day. This is going on, that's going on. And all of a sudden the competition begins again. And the more you take this on, the more you start to program yourself or condition yourself to see fear as a reality. So therefore you sometimes even see it before it becomes a reality. And the more you see it, the more real it becomes. Now, when you see it and you take it on as a reality, the next thing that happens is you start getting more social proof. Why? Because you start sharing your fears. So you go to somebody and go, I would love to do that. I'd love to create something magnificent. But I'm fearful. I'm afraid it won't work. And someone says, yeah, you're right. Most people I know, it never worked out for them either. Right? And all of a sudden that fear now becomes reinforced. So therefore your reality becomes reinforced because what you think about, you come about, right? So if you focus on the fear or being fearful, then you're full of fear, right? It's in the word. But what if you were to focus on being fearless? Would that mean that you would fear less? So you would give yourself the chance again to become that master creator that you once were. Because I know everybody I've ever met can tell me magnificent stories of their past, of the things that they've done and they've created. Yet somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it's because you lost the excitement. Maybe because you became dull. Maybe your environment changed. And how the world is being communicated to you is changing. Just like Pete, you mentioned during this current situation, and it's not something I give a lot of attention to. But one thing that does sadden me at times is when I know some people who are magnificent people, who have been master creators for so long, who have become fearful right now. And I know they didn't imagine this. They didn't do it on their own, that's for sure, because their past history tells me something different. Their past history tells me what they're truly capable of when they're fearless. So who told them they should be fearful? Where did they find it? How did they know? How did they know that all the things that you're worried about right now are going to become a reality unless you make it so? So again, if you start thinking about the things you had before you had fear, what if you had a chance to relive the thrill of life, or the victory, or even the pain of defeat? Something that you used to enjoy. And majority of people as children have no fear. That's why I love watching kids play. I love kids doing things. They're fearless. You know, sometimes it frightens the bejesus out of me, right? But you know what? They're fearless. I love it. Let them out there, let them have it. So did you. So did everybody who's watching here, who's paying attention to this. So imagine if you could have that chance to relive the thrill of life, of victory, or even the pain of defeat, or whatever it was, something that you used to enjoy. So you can recognize that you are a master creator. And in recognizing that you are a master creator, you have created something else. Now, I want you to see this as a good thing. Because even sometimes when you use the term I'm going to use, some people, the old fear comes back in again. Some people keep pushing that fear button, right? People push that button. And by the way, you know, if you leave that button exposed, other people are going to push it for you, right? You know, as everyone, you know, you remember, Pete, you get these little things for shaking hands, and they give a little bit of a shock, right? And if you happen to leave it there on your hand, and everyone who knew you saw you, they'd push that button, wouldn't it, just for fun, just to give you a bit of pain? Cruel people, right? But you know, people will do simple things like that just for a bit of fun. And you know, and the reality is, so maybe they're pushing that fear button for a bit of fun, or maybe they're doing it without realizing the effect and the damage it could potentially have, because they're not aware of being fearful. And they're only sharing with you what the majority of people in their environment is telling them, what society is saying right now based on news or information. Okay, on information. Now, sometimes information is good, right? Sometimes information is good, but our fears only come from the information, I believe, of the past, and a message that has been delivered to you through somebody or through experience. And usually the fear of the future are things that you don't know, and you're fearful that it may not happen, it may not work because somebody else told you so. Just because it didn't work for them, just because some people are not prepared to put in the effort, to put in the work, to do whatever it needs to be done in order for to have whatever they want to have, doesn't mean they have to instill their fear onto you. Because respectfully, if they're fearful and they're not doing anything about their dreams, if they're not going to go back and allow themselves the opportunity to relive the thrill of life, then that's got to do with them. It's got nothing to do with you. And the reality is, if they live in that space, that is their reality. It's real for them. Well, it doesn't have to be real for you. It just means that they haven't given themselves, in my opinion, enough opportunity, enough choices, and enough chances, and to allow themselves to become fearless. So again, if you can recognize that you're a master creator, you will recognize as a master creator, you have created something else, which we call as greater challenge. Now imagine a button called greater challenge, as opposed to a button that's called fear. And if you consider all that comes of pushing this button, You decide that pushing this button will probably provide some of the excitement and satisfaction that you were missing from earlier in your life. So I'm going to encourage you to take a deep breath and push the button. Push the button of greater challenge and allow yourself to be fearless. Find yourself where you're at right now, feeling what you're feeling right now, thinking what you're thinking right now, with everything the way your life is right now, and become fearless. Always remind yourself that people are born to succeed, not to fail. I have a fantastic quote from Sidney J. Harris I'm going to share with you. And it simply says that regret for the things we did can be tempered by time. It is regret for the things that we did not do that is inconsolable. I've done things in my past, in my life, that I could look back and I could say, yeah, could have done it better, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? Or, again, to quote the great Brian Tracy, Crink, knowing what I now know. But how would I know if I didn't take the chance? If I was to be living in a fearful life, I probably would have took no chances. And I have a good idea where I might be today if I was fearful. I don't believe I would be living a thrilling life. Don't believe I would have had half the excitement I've had. And over time, you can deal with things, you can change things. If you've done things that you regret, you can change them over time. You can learn from them, you can move on. You can move beyond the fear. But I promise you, the things that you do not now do, the things that you haven't done, I have met so many people, and we know I've read so many books that talks about this, but I've been blessed that I've met so many people that I got a true understanding of this. When people are inconsolable for the things that they did not do. And I'm sure there's somebody going to watch this or listen to this or read this, and they're going to recognize something that if they don't get out and make an effort, it will be inconsolable at some point in their life. Maybe you've already told this story to somebody. Maybe you've shared it 1,000 times just to justify it so you don't feel so bad about it. I mean that respectfully too. But again, choose to be fearless. Roosevelt Franklin is famous for saying, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It's not a good communication. I think he was right. Fear of fear probably causes more problems in our lives than fear itself. Fear of fear causes anxiety, depression, unfortunately, sometimes suicide. But the fear of something, and the reality is, it's understandable to be fearful of certain things because you haven't done it before. You have no idea whether whatever you want to do is going to work or not. You have no idea as to whether you're going to get the outcomes. You have no idea as to whether you're going to feel stupid or challenged or fail or even succeed. And you have no idea of what people are going to think. When I say you have no idea, you have no control over any of these things either. And you have no control even if you don't face the fears. It really changes what people think. The feeling of failure, if you don't face the fear, rarely goes away. For most people I've met over the years, they challenge themselves. Remember the thing that they fear the most about not succeeding about something. But most people who have never went out and actually challenged themselves to do it, challenge themselves now because they beat themselves up because they never took that chance. So does fear go away if you don't face it, or you just learn to live with it? So, when we think about fear and, being the only thing that we have to fear is fear itself, right? I suppose it's fear. This kind of claim needs to be little bit of explaining. Okay, so I'm going to try and share a little bit more because fear gets a bad rap, and it's almost not as complicated as most people try to make it. So, a simple and useful definition of fear is an anxious feeling caused by our anticipation of some imagined event or experience, and usually the experience that is shared from you. By the way, most of your experiences are imagined. Did you know that? Because they've been shared with you so many times by so many people that you've always imagined that it was true for you too. That you can always put yourself there. I'm sure that sometimes people, you might have a family member who goes to the same place on holiday all the time, and they describe the place they've been on holiday. They've been there 20, 30, 40 times. You've never been there. And all of a sudden you go there and it's like you know exactly where it is. It's like you've been there all your life. And that's simply because it has been ingrained so much into you. You can almost draw the picture. You draw the picture, you can almost feel what it's like to be there. So when you get there, everything seems familiar. Fear, in my opinion, is the same. It's an imagined event or experience, but it's usually an experience that's imagined because it has been shared to you by somebody else. Right? We started here talking about Halloween, right? So we think about the fear and talk about all the different types of fear and the whole story of Halloween and how Halloween comes about and the fear of ghosts and the living dead and all this. And also people are going, oh, don't talk about that, don't talk about that, right? But it's an imagined experience that was created by the big screen. And it is amazing how people react. Imagine people sitting there watching a horror movie and then they almost jump out of their skin. Yet they know logically it's just a movie, it's not real. But it creates an impact, creates an emotion, it creates an experience. So if you leave yourself in that experience often enough, soon you'll have no skin left. You'll have jumped so many times. But the reality is that when it comes to people talking about whether you want to achieve something, whether you're going to be clever enough or smart enough or capable, and when most people say, oh yeah, like I hear people talk about school. Okay, now I didn't have a great experience at school, but I didn't have that much of a terrible experience either. It kind of balanced itself out. But I hear people talking about education and the schooling system and how it doesn't serve people, etc., etc. And because that message has been reinforced so many times, people believe it to be true. So people have a fear of, recently we had people sitting exams. People have a fear of whether I'll pass my exam. If I don't pass my exam, they have a fear of whether they'll be able to succeed in life or achieve anything in life. And ironically, yesterday, 4 years ago, it was the day before yesterday actually, 4 years ago, Brian Tracy arrived in Ireland. Probably saw the videos on my Facebook, but he arrived in Ireland for the first day. And we went for dinner that evening, and my now 19-year-old son came for dinner with us. And here we were having a conversation, and next thing, Brian taps me in the shoulder, and he says, Pat, he said, I've got some advice here. And I said, go ahead. And he pointed at Jason. He said, take him out of school and teach him how to make money. And Jason looked at me and goes, yeah. Right. And I went, oh, Brian, stop. He said, why not? You did it. Teach him how to do what you've done. And, ironically, it's something that was up to that point. Jason had this notion he wanted to go to college. He wanted to, do different things. But he realized for him, no, that was a belief that was instilled in him. But he also had this fear, well, what if I don't pass my exams? What if I don't become successful? Now, he had this before Brian, so definitely Brian didn't create this, right? So that fear was sitting there. Well, what if I don't get enough points on my exams? What if I don't do this? And where am I going to end up? You know what? Maybe I just need to know how to sell. I'm going to learn how to sell. I'm going to learn how to make money. And he does. And you know what? And, he's 19 years of age. He's been through 3 or 4 different jobs. He's consistently earning. And he earns a good income, and he has a bit of a plan for his life because he is fearless about it now, because we allowed him to become fearless. He'd done his exams, he got okay points, but he said it doesn't mean anything to him because what he wants to do is not going to teach him. So he lost that fearfulness, if you like, around it that he had, because he started to believe. Why? Because he surrounded himself with people who have done it, who've achieved it. So therefore, there was a new message communicated to him. And I think this was really important. There was a new message communicated to him through me, through Brian, through other people. And he was in control of how he received that communication. So you have to ask yourself, what communication are you receiving around fear? Because you can choose to receive it. You can't really do much about those who want to give it to you, because they're going to talk anyway, right? So they're going to communicate fear to you. You have to choose how you receive that information. Do you want to receive fearfulness or fearlessness? I know what I choose. Because I also understand that when people take on the fear, now when you feel fearless, do you feel anxious? I bet not. When you feel fearless, you feel alive. You feel that thrill of life again. Because only when you feel fearful do you experience those anxious feelings. So if you had a choice, which I believe you do have, to choose to be fearless, then all of a sudden, those imagined events or those experiences, they become positive. And they usually become your reality. So be careful what you communicate to yourself and what you communicate to others. Because if you communicate a fearful life to fearful people, you're going to get a lot more social proof that you're right. If you communicate a fearless life to fearless people, you're going to be communicated to that you're probably right. So again, fear, like all emotions, is just basically information. And it offers knowledge and understanding if you choose to accept it. So what information are you accepting? What are you allowing in? And are you choosing to accept it? Now, I came across an article on Psychology Today, and I'm going to share with you what they believe are only 5 basic fears. There was a psychologist that shared this, and I'm happy to find his name again and share it with you. But when they talk about saying that there are only 5 basic fears, out of which almost all of our other so-called fears are manufactured. Now, think about this. There are 5 basic fears from which almost all other fears are manufactured. Okay, so number 1 is extinction, ceasing to exist, or again, the more fundamental way to express it is a fear of death, right? The idea of no longer being around arouses primary existential anxiety in all normal humans. Okay, consider that panicky feeling when you look over the edge of a high building, right? So that's what people go, oh yeah, there's fear of heights. Oh, you mean the fear of heights comes because of the fear of death? I understand now, right? So again, the other one is mutilation, the fear of losing any body part of our precious bodily structure. The thought of having our body's boundaries invaded, or of losing the integrity of any organ, body part, or natural function. Anxiety about animals such as bugs, spiders, snakes, and other creepy things arise from fear of mutilation. What if it bites me? I'm afraid of snakes. No, you're not. You're afraid of getting bitten, right? The loss of autonomy, the fear of being immobilized, paralyzed, restricted, enveloped, overwhelmed, and trapped, imprisoned, smothered, or otherwise controlled by circumstances beyond your control. In a physical form, people may commonly know it as claustrophobia, but it also extends to our social interactions and relationships. Separation, a fear of abandonment, rejection, the loss of connectedness, of becoming a non-person, not wanted, not respected or valued by anyone else, or getting that silent treatment when imposed by a group can have a devastating effect on its target. And then we have ego death, the fear of humiliation, shame, or any other mechanism of profound self-disapproval that threatens the loss of integrity of the self. The fear of the shattering or disintegrated of one's constructed sense of lovability, capability, and worthiness. Now, think about the various common labels we put on our fears. Start with the easy ones, by the way. Fear of heights or fear of falling is basically the fear of extinction, possibly accompanied by the fear of significant mutilation, but that's kind of secondary, right? Well, what's the worst that can happen? I might die. Okay, well, oh shit, I might break a leg, I might lose an arm, right? So, all these secondary ones that come really are based on the primary fears. Now, Fear of failure. Now, you can also read that as the fear of ego debt or the fear of rejection. And again, that's fear of separation and probably also the fear of ego debt. The terror that many people have, the idea of having to speak in public, is basically the fear of ego debt. Think about that too, right? So the fear of rejection is most people are the fear of separation. People don't really fear failure. They fear how they're going to be judged because of failure. You know, they feel the fear of rejection by trying to become successful. The fear of rejection is not the fear of success, it's the fear of rejection. So what's really going on when we think about fear, and how are you communicating these messages to yourself and to other people? You know, the terror that many people have at the idea of having to speak in public, right, is again the fear of ego debt. People say one of the most common fears, the number one fear in the world I've often had, is the fear of public speaking. And I absolutely believe that's nonsense. Right? Because you're honestly telling me that the fear of public speaking supersedes the fear of death, right? And if you think so, okay, imagine then that you're brought into a conference, a seminar, and there's 1,000 people there, and you've got to go up and stand in front of them, and you have a fear of public speaking. And imagine that there's somebody standing behind you with a gun and is loaded, and you know they're going to shoot you if you don't go and do a 20-minute presentation. I think you'll overcome the fear of public speaking very quickly, right? Now, another way that you might discover this is, imagine that you are on the same stage, standing at the side of the stage, 1,000 people, and somebody says, you've got to give a 20-minute presentation. You go, but I have a fear of public speaking. I said, well, there's a shame, because I have a check here for 25 grand that I want to give you for that 20 minutes. I bet you'll overcome that fear of public speaking, right? All that is ego debt, right? You know, what would people think of me? What would people judge me, whether I do a good one or not? If you're getting paid 25 grand for 20 minutes, you won't care. But you know what? Chances are you would deliver something exceptional anyway. Okay. Then you have the fear of intimacy, fear of commitment. Have you ever heard about that one? Fear of commitment. And really, that's just the fear of losing one's autonomy. Like, the fear of commitment is really and truly, it's not about commitment. It's a fear of feeling smothered or imprisoned or entrapped. Or what if I'm not happy? What if I do this? What if I become intimate and I don't feel the love that I really want to feel, and I want to get out? I have no way out. It's a feeling of being trapped. And the reality is, if you move beyond that, then maybe you could become more intimate. Maybe you could commit more. And maybe even to yourself. Maybe the fear of intimacy is a lack of commitment to yourself, or the fear of commitment. So again, if you were fearless, what would that look like? So again, some other emotions that we know by various popular names are just aliases for primary fears. So if you track them down to the most basic level, again, the basic fears show through jealousy, for example, is an expression of a fear of separation or devaluation, right? So you'll often hear people say, oh, she'll value him more than she values me, right? Or at its extreme, it can express the fear of ego debt. I'll be a worthless person. Envy, by the way, works in the same way. Isn't it nonsense when we let the fears take over? Shame and guilt express the fear of, or maybe even the actual condition of, separation and even ego debt. The same is true for embarrassment or humiliation. Now, again, all of these are something that have been communicated to you. They're not yours, they're not reality, unless you believe them to be so, unless you take them as part of who you are, and unless you live in a fearful life. And when you are fearful, again, you've got to be very careful how you communicate them. Fear is often the base emotion in which anger floats. Oppressed people rage against their oppressors because they fear or actually experience loss of autonomy and even ego debt. The destruction of cultures or religions by invading occupiers may be experienced as a kind of a collective ego debt. And those who make us fearful will also make us angry. Nobody likes to feel fearful, right? And if you feel fearful, Would it be true that you become angry? Would it be true that you become angry with people who make you fearful? You may not express it to the people who create that fearfulness, but you may express your anger in other ways. So you're communicating your fears through anger. Maybe. So, we could get really in depth into religions on this one, but it's certainly not something I want to open up. Okay. But religious bigotry and intolerance may explain the fear of ego death on a cosmic level and can even extend to an existential anxiety. If my God isn't the right God or the best God, then I'll be stuck without a God. And without God on my side, I'll be at the mercy of impersonal forces of the environment. Right? So, there is a way through different mediums that fear is communicated to you. I mean this respectful, by the way, and I truly mean to be respectful when I talk about religion here. But to me, religion is probably the cause of most fears. I don't know about you, but I know growing up, I watched a movie recently and I laughed out loud. It was a bit of a comedy and I can't even remember the name of it. But somebody knocked on the door and this guy came out screaming like a lunatic, right? Because people invaded his land and he was swinging a whip at them and he was saying, "Are you God fearing? Are you God fearing?" and that was so important to him that right. And imagine being God fearing. Imagine that. Is it not meant to be the opposite? Or we're meant to truly love who God is, whoever your God is, by the way, and be fearless when you want to talk to your God or reach out or out to the universe to share whatever you feel like sharing and look for the answers. Should you not be able to do that fearlessly? So again, some fears, by the way, have basic survival value. Others are learned reflexes that can be weakened or relearned. Now, for me, part of my fear of failure and that fear of the ego, right, and the ego death and the fear of being judged was certainly a driving force in me also. But I did learn, through that fear that we got what I call willpower. And that willpower was driving me on because I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of going back. I was afraid of poverty. I was afraid of hunger. So that drove me on. And it got me to a certain point in my life and it served me to a certain point. And so will some of your fears. But with that comes stress. And, people say, some fears are good, some anxiety is good, some bit of stress is good. I don't believe any of it is good. And it's only when I got to that point where I decided and I chose to become fearless that I realized the fear had no power anymore. Even though it was driving me and it might have seemed like it had a positive effect, it didn't. It served me to a certain point. But when I became fearless, that's when everything really changed. That's when everything really changed. That's when life became so much easier. Now, again, some fears do have a basic survival value. I know a friend of mine I know for many years, I almost said he was almost famous for saying, "Only the paranoid survive. Only the paranoid survive," he used to say, And I said, "Really?" I said, "What are you fearful of?" "I'm not afraid of anything." And I said, "I didn't say you're not afraid of anything." I said, "What are you fearful of?" There's a difference. He said, "Listen, only the paranoid survive." And that used to stick with me in the early days, which meant trust nobody. Trust nobody, do what you do. And sometimes that fear will drive you forward. It does sometimes make you become aware. You have to be very consciously aware of your environment too. And become consciously aware that I can tell you, I don't want to go back to the fears. I want to live a life, a fully thrilled life, if you like. I want to live a life of excitement. So the fact that I can recognize some of the fears, the survival here is to don't go there. I recognize it when it's being presented. In this current climate, it's being presented 30, 40 times a day. And I keep saying to people, not in my world. I understand that frustrates people, and I'm not dismissing the fact that people are struggling as a result of this, but not in my world. I refuse to let it in. Matter of fact, I don't even refuse to let it in. I just refuse to let it pass me by. I'm not living in fear. I want to be fearless. I care less about the problems that might come. I care less about the possibility of what may go wrong. And I'm careful of what I let in, what I choose to believe. So therefore, I'm full of care. I can care for what really matters because I fear less. That doesn't mean I'm not cautious. Common sense, there's common sense prevails too, right? This, when we talk about the survival value, some of the fears have basic survival value. You know, if you're, you're leaning over a mile high cliff, it's a good idea to be fearful about taking a step too forward, right? So there's a basic survival value there. You also know when you're surrounded by bad people and in a bad environment that you need to get out of there, right? So that fear, in that sense, when that kicks in, that's kind of like a survival value, a survival instinct that you have. So some of these fears have purpose also, but you don't take them with you all your life. You don't fear going out into the city. I mean, I've had to make changes in my life. I've went to new places I've never been. I started a new life, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited about what the future is bringing, and about the more new things I'm doing. I'm excited about coming on here, sharing with you guys with about, all right, I'll give you a fairness, about 10 hours notice of what we're going to discuss, right? And sometimes we just come and we go with the flow. I'm fearless. I trust that what I'm going to share will resonate with somebody. And I also trust it may not be for everybody. And I'm actually okay with that. My intention is to communicate it in a way that I hope that everybody understands it. And for me, I try to simplify life and I try to simplify things. And if not everybody gets me, that's okay. I have no fear that I have to please everybody all of the time. I'm enjoying it. And that's what matters first. So again, start thinking differently. Okay. Now, the strange idea of facing our fears becomes less strange when we realize that many of our avoidance reactions, turning down an invitation to a party if you tend to be uncomfortable in groups, putting off a doctor's appointment, or not asking for a raise if you feel like you deserve it, are just instant reflexes that are reactions to the memories of fear. I was working with somebody recently and had a really good conversation with this person, and went on to talk about, I actually knew this person's dad really well. And I said, can we talk openly and respectfully? And he said, yeah. I said, your dad, actually, his dad was an absolute gentleman. I mean that sincerely. He was a gentleman. But he was a yes man. The fear of upsetting people and the fear of letting people down meant he went through most of his life without. And the reason I had this conversation, the penny dropped with this person, because this person said, yeah, that's me. Oh, I said, really? So therefore, it's not your fear then, is it? He said, yeah, I actually remember times my dad, and he started telling me stories of the things his dad done. And I often wonder, why would he do that? And sometimes he'd come home and my mum would say, why did you do that? That's ridiculous. And he said, oh, but sure, I couldn't let people down. The fear of letting people down affected who he was. And now here we have a whole new generation, and his son is doing exactly the same thing. Why? Because his son carried a memory of fear. It wasn't his. It was communicated to him. And he received that communication with open arms. So again, when we think about the instant reflexes, they happen so quickly that we don't actually experience the full effect of the fear. We experience a micro fear, a reaction that's a kind of shorthand code for the real fear. And this reflex reaction has the same effect of causing us to evade and avoid as the real fear does. That is why it's fairly accurate to say that many of our so-called fear reactions are actually the fear of fears. You're fearing the thing that you do not know. And the reality is, how could you know if you haven't traveled this before, if you're on a new journey, if you're looking to do something you have never done before? You have no notion that it's going to work out, so you can understand why you will be fearful of that. But imagine if you were fearless, that you went back to being that person that you were before that was fearless, to living that thrilled life, of doing the things you'd done before you lived in fear. What would it be like? What would you do? Instead of focus on the fear of fears. Now, this sounds a bit crazy, doesn't it? When you think about it. Sounds a bit senseless. Or sounds like it makes nonsense, no sense. Because it is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. If you're communicating your fears to yourself and to other people, and if you're receiving that same communication, then respectfully, most people will live in a life of fear. So how are you communicating your fears? Who are you communicating them to? Who is giving you the memory of fear? Who gave it to you? Isn't it amazing that I hear people telling me, oh, I have a fear of setting up my own business, and I have a fear of, not succeeding. And I say, really? So when we really get into it, we discover how their environment has impacted them in thinking that way, and the people that they start impacting. So I said, like, let's make a list. Let's make a list of all those people. Let's talk about them for a moment. Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of those faced their fears? How many have actually stepped up and done what you want to do? How many even gave it a shot? And we've discovered almost always that none of them have actually given them, not one of them. They usually, and when we get really in depth to this, what happens is usually telling me a story that this person talked about their parents before, when they shared their story with them. So now we have 3 generations of a memory of fear. And people are living an unsatisfied life because it has been communicated through 3 generations. And these people haven't even experienced it. Right? They haven't. This is not a memory of experience. This is a memory of imagination. Imagine fear. Because the story has been communicated through generations. Doesn't that sound crazy? So think about it. The fear of fears. What real memory do you have? And if you do have a real experience memory, then you know that there's something different you could have done. It's not that you weren't capable, that it couldn't happen. It just means you need to find something else to do. You have nothing to fear anymore because you know how not to do it. So for most people, the fear of the experience is, what if it goes wrong? Imagine having that real experience and that knowledge that you know what goes wrong. Imagine that. Should be no fear then, because you already know what the worst case scenario is. So stop fearing the fears. When we let go of our notion of fears as the welling up of, it's like evil forces, if you like, within us, and begin to see the fear and its companion emotions as information, we can think about them consciously. And the more clearly and calmly we can articulate the origins of the fear, the less our fears will frighten us and control us. So when we think about it logically, so again, I'll use something I've seen Donna do in a seminar in the past. For those who are watching and listening right now, let's use your imagination for a moment. And imagine you're afraid of spiders. But imagine having one about the size of my hand, about that size. Really hairy legs, but on the tip, there's a little bit scratchy. But imagine now you're sitting there and you can feel something kind of around your ankle. And you feel it's like a little scratchy thing. But you're not sure. But then all of a sudden you look down and you see the last 2 legs going up the leg of your trousers. And you're sitting there in panic and you can feel it. And you can feel it coming up along your leg and you're going, oh, geez, what am I going to do? And as you start feeling it, imagine feeling it coming up and it gets right up under your shirt and it's going up your back. And you can feel it up coming up on your shoulder blades now on the back of your neck. And all of a sudden you feel it just hitting the back of your ear. Now I bet you most of you are watching or listening to this are feeling it. And you're feeling that shiver and you're feeling the hair standing back of your neck and you're feeling the bit of ha. Now let's think about it logically. We know it's not there. It's not really happening. Well, look at the response, the physical response that you've had. Just imagining it. Even though now let's think logically, we can just dismiss that instantly because we know it's not real. Well, it's actually not there. So when we start thinking emotionally and logically, fears are driven by emotion. Sometimes you have to take back and be logical about it and think to yourself, okay, well, what happens? What is the worst case scenario? I might learn something new and how not to do something so I can change and I can move forward in my life. And if I take the emotions and understand that those emotions are just information, then I think consciously and I think clearly and calmly, and I can articulate what I really want and how I can move out of the fear. So logically thinking, I understand for some people that can be difficult and may need practice. And I mean that sincerely, by the way, that sometimes it can be difficult for people to think logically because people learn in different ways. So let's talk about communication a little bit more then. Because when it comes to communication, one of the biggest frustrations I have come across in people over, well, I would say 26 years in this industry, but it's something I recognize from people for probably most of my life, is not being understood. One of the biggest frustrations I come across from people is not being understood. So that means we have to think about our communication skills. Okay. Now, a definition for communication skills would be they are the ability. Communication skills. I need a drink of water. Communication skills are the abilities you use when giving and receiving different kinds of information. Some examples include communication ideas, feelings, or what's happening around you. Communication skills involve listening, speaking, observing, and empathizing. It is also helpful to understand the difference in how to communicate through face-to-face interactions, phone conversations, digital communications like email and social media. This is something that's really, because when we talk about the different types of communications that are there right now, many years ago it was telegraph, right? You send a telegraph and people had to interpret what it meant, right? Because it was usually very shorthand. I remember in school years ago, again, the same teacher. I had one magnificent teacher in my life, a guy called Paddy O'Flynn, who was an extremely intelligent man in how he taught things. And he says, so we talked about communication. I'm trying to remember it now, and this is back when I was probably about 10 years old, right? So it'd be great if I remember this right now. But he said a communication that was sent by telegraph ended up on the desk of a man, and it said, "Can come, can't come. Will he come, can come. Will he come, can come." And you're going, no, stop. I know what you're thinking, right? So what it was, there was an invitation to a party for the father of the family, whose name was Can Come, right? The Chinese family. And Willie Come is Can Come's son. So the communication was can come, can't come. In other words, can come, the dad can't come to the party. Willie Come, can come. So that's Willie Come, who is the son of can come, can come. And then the question is, will Willie Come come? And it was signed by the father, can come. Right? Now, when people look at that, and people look at that and go, God, what kind of a communication is that? Now, when we actually understand the communication, but you have to interpret, most people interpret what they say by the message that's communicated to them. So when a message is being interpreted and people feel like they're not being understood, that's when the frustrations come. Okay, so when we talk about the different types of communication right now, and we think about, you have telephone conversations, okay, you can have a verbal conversation. So it's much easier to explain the meaning of your conversation and how you're delivering the message. So you're communicating it better. Now, sometimes, let me ask somebody else. You can ask yourself this question, because I've met a lot of people who've received a text message. And when they read the text message, they go, oh, it's like a fear. Some fear comes in because they're interpreting it to mean something maybe that it doesn't. And how many times I've seen people talk about, when they send a text and they go, what do they mean by that? That's a very harsh message. And the other person says, oh, I'll just send that. That's just very much to the point. They'll understand that. In text messages, there's no emotion in a text message. So it's very difficult to get the full meaning. And so many people get distracted by a text message, and it creates so much fear and frustration and anger and all those other emotions we discussed earlier, because it's being communicated to you in a certain way, right? Now, as you're communicating who you are, what you do, again, understand, you can communicate fearfulness or fearlessness in dealing with you, right? So you understand the importance of your communication and your communication skills. So again, it's when we talk about creating that communication, I think everybody knows now, everybody understands the belief that, that words account for 7% of your overall message. Tone of voice accounts for 38% of your overall message, but body language accounts for 55% of your overall message. So if body language accounts for 55% of that, then bearing in mind that when you send a text message or an email or a letter, that emotion is not there. It's not easy for people to read the intention behind your communication. Now, the other side of that is you have to understand then, when people are there, how are you communicating through your body language? And, in the past, this is something I was always fascinated with, I have to admit, and particularly within the security industry, the industry I was in. I have mentored and trained thousands of security personnel on understanding body language and understanding how a message is being communicated. Usually, if somebody is shouting and shouting at you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to do this, the chances are they're not. Right? Chances are they're not. But but when you understand, you can read the body language, you can see the behaviors of people, you can see the way they think, the way they look, and particularly in the face, right? The face gives an awful lot away. I can look at you right now, Pete, right, and imagine right now I look happy, but in a very small moment I can look like I'm a bit annoyed, right? And then I can look a bit sad, or I can look frustrated. And these are very small movement. Now, if I was to sit here having a conversation with you and I was like this, you'd be sitting there thinking, what's wrong? There's something wrong. He's not happy. Am I right? Okay, so understanding your communication skills and the different ways of delivering it and how you're delivering it. And this when we talk to people, people say, okay, well, I don't have the confidence. I'm fearful. I'm a bit afraid that I won't be accepted. So if you're afraid, if you are living in the fear of not being accepted, usually what happens when people is living in that fear, and by the way, when most people put out their hand to shake your hand and welcome you, they generally mean it, by the way. So if we were to be fearless, we would assume that to be the case. But if you're fearful of not being accepted, or whether they'll think you're good enough to be in their company, usually what happens is, when people give that handshake and you call it a wet fish, right? So you're communicating to those people that you're not that confident. Or some people just give a very light handshake, and it could communicate that you're not really interested in talking to them. And usually that comes from a fear that you're holding back, that maybe they won't accept me, etc. But what if you were fearless and you could communicate better because you were fearless? How do you think that's going to have a positive impact in your life? And in what way? And at what level? So we got to become conscious of how our fear are how our fears are interfering with our communication. The other thing is the tone of voice, speaking up. People have this fear of speaking up because what if I say something stupid? Chances are you won't. We often hear there's no such thing as a silly question. Well, there is. It's the one that you don't ask. Usually, when somebody asks a silly question in a room, more than half the room are going, "Oh, I'm glad they asked that question." You're not on your own. The other thing is, for people need to understand, when you live in a fearless mindset and in a fearless world, you can speak up with confidence. And you can speak up with confidence knowing that not everybody has to get it, but you will know that somebody will get it, and you will know that you're making a difference to somebody. Somebody needed to hear what it is you have to say right now. And don't live in a world of comparisons. People fear because they compare themselves to other people too. And I've been in many, many places, and I've been in many, many seminars, and I've been in the world of personal growth for such a long time that I have met some people who will communicate their feelings of, oh, sure, that's obvious, or we know that, that's old stuff, without realizing it's old stuff for them that may be brand new for somebody else, and it may be the message that somebody needs to hear right now. And whether you think something is common sense or is obvious, well, if it's common sense and obvious, then it doesn't matter. You know you're stating something that's a fact anyway, right? So be fearless in stating it. So what if they've heard it before? Most people need to hear it over and over and over before they take ownership. So when you think about how you're communicating your message, both physically, verbally, and emotionally, then I can guarantee you, you will begin to become much more fearless, because you will be received in a much better way. And those that don't get it, that's okay. You've got nothing to prove to them. So communicating your fears, be careful how you communicate them. As long as you're communicating to somebody who can take them on board and let them go, and allow you to let them go too. But don't instill my call to action, I suppose, really. It's not my advice, it's a suggestion, and maybe it's a plea. Well, the plea I would have here is, don't instill your fears onto other people. Don't instill the fears of society onto other people. Don't instill the memories of fears that you really know nothing about because you haven't experienced them yet onto other people. Because chances are somebody has instilled those memories of fear onto you. And that's what's stopping you from moving forward. Somebody has communicated those fears to you. And it stops you from moving forward. And imagine a life without that communication. What would it be like? Imagine if you had that life without that communication of fear. What would it be like? What kind of a life do you think you'd live? Would you be able to find that thrill of life again? Sure you would. Wouldn't it be nice if you could communicate fearlessness so other people can experience that thrill of life? Because you have the power to communicate fearfulness or fearlessness. I know what I choose. And I encourage you to communicate fearlessness and allow people to live and be the best versions of themselves. Now, there are multiple skills that you could use in order to do this, and one of them is active listening. When they talk about skills of communication, active listening means paying close attention to the person who is speaking to you. People who are active listeners are well regarded by their colleagues, their co-workers, their peers, because of the attention and respect that they offer others. While it seems simple, a skill can be difficult to develop and improve, because most people listen with the intention of responding. Excuse me. So again, you can be an active listener by focusing on the speaker of the moment, whoever it is speaking, avoiding distractions like cell phones, laptops, or any other project that's pulling you away, and maybe by preparing questions, comments, or ideas to thoughtfully respond. This is something, Pete, that I believe you're an exceptional communicator at. You can learn how to adapt your communication style to suit your audience. There are different styles of communication, and they are appropriate in different situations. To make the best of your communication skills, it's important to consider your audience in the most effective format to communicate with them. Think, what way do they receive communication? Now we all know that there are different types of people, different learning styles. We have, people who learn visually, people who learn auditory, people who learn kinesthetically, and auditory digital. So sometimes when you think about this, people who are visual learn by pictures. People who are visual say, just show me once, let me see it. If I see it once, I'll never forget it. Show it to me. And people who are highly visual say, they see everything you're talking about in pictures, or they use words like, look, it's like this. So you got to pay attention to your audience so you know how to communicate them. Because if somebody is talking in pictures, in order to communicate them with them, the best way to communicate to them is in pictures or visually. So you see, I would say, if I was to show you as a visual person how things would look if you were to live the life that you see yourself living. Visual people can get the pictures. They get it instantly. Now, auditory are people who like sounds, or music. Musicians are fantastic auditory learners. So anybody who's on here, I bet you usually they like words, they like to read books, they like to see the words, hear the words, but they like the music. They can pick up the music almost instantly. People who are self-taught musicians are auditory. They I often say I have the ear for it, right? So pay attention to what people are saying. People who are auditory will use words like, that sounds okay to me, right? Or they might say to you, how does that sound? And when they use words like that, you know that they're auditory. So it's important that you talk in that format. People who are kinesthetic are by feelings. They go, well, you know what feels good? Or how does that feel to you? Does that feel right? So you got to talk in feelings. Now, usually what happens when people are communicating here, here's what happens, and this is what we got to be very careful of when you understand this, because people get frustrated, right, when they're trying to communicate a message. So let's mix a visual person with a kinesthetic person. Now, you can be all four, by the way. There's another one I'll get to in a moment. You can be all four. So there's no right here and there's no wrong, right? It is what it is. You are what you are, but you will have all of these learning processes anyway, right? Everybody has them, but some are just stronger than others. But somebody who's highly visual is kind of thinks in pictures, boom, boom, and they move. They talk very quick. They move their hands when they're talking, and they talk very fast. You know anybody like that? Right? So they talk really quick. And then you have people who are kinesthetic who tend to talk a bit slower. And so I could share a story here today. I could share a story of my life, of my childhood. And I could talk about it. And people who are visual, they'll see the picture quite quickly and they'll move very fast through the story. And then people who are kinesthetic go, oh, the poor thing. And they want to know more. They want to feel the story and they slow it down a little bit. And they go, oh, geez, I felt so, my heart broke a few then. But people who are visual kind of go, what's wrong with you? It's not that big a deal. Get on with it. And then people who are kinesthetic go, geez, you're very cold. That's not very nice. And people go, visually go, what's wrong with you? It's like, get over it. It's moved on, right? And they become frustrated. And it's not that anyone is wrong or anyone's right. You just need to understand how people have different learning abilities. Now, for me going to school, I'm going to be visual kinesthetic. Visual pictures. I see something, you show me something, if I bring me someplace once, I don't care how long it takes us to get there, I'll never forget the way once you've showed me, right? So for me, visually was huge, but I wasn't taught that way. I was taught in an auditory fashion, or the fourth one, which is auditory digital systems, systemized, follow the system. Now that used to frustrate the hell out of me. Okay, people who follow systems, respectfully, I don't mean this for everybody, because you do have a personality. Don't anyone tell you don't, right? But people who are auditory digital may come across like they have no personality. I hear people say this, again, respectfully, about accountants or engineers. They say, I'm telling the story, and the accountant says, yeah, but just show me on paper. I need to see the plan. Engineers need to see the plan. Show me the plan. Without the drawings, I can't get it done. Show me the plan. They love to follow a plan. And it makes more sense when it's given to them in that way. So if you're dealing with people who are auditory digital, you're going to have to go through step by step. So let's say, okay, Pete, how did I get here this morning? Well, first thing, number one, what I done this morning, when I decided to get up, I went and had a shower, had a shave. The next thing I done is down, I went put on that kettle. Then I went out, turned on the lights in the office, right? Next thing I done was turned on the laptop. Fifth thing I done is went back in, and made myself a cup of coffee. Next step I done was came back out, and and people who are already digital will love that. They'll say, yeah, boom, boom. It's like ticking the boxes exercise. So already digital type of people. So once you understand how you're communicating with people, just pay attention to how people are speaking to you. And that comes back to being an active listener. And you can communicate. So you can adapt your communication style to your audience. And your audience may be a one-to-one. It may be a loved one. Usually, when we do this exercise with loved ones, they realize they fall back in love with each other again. They don't have to frustrate each other anymore because now he understands me, or now she gets it, right? Because they're communicating in different ways. So it might be somebody that you want to love, right? And you can't understand why they're not interested in me. Is they just don't get you? Maybe it's just a different communication style. And again, of course, children, right? The importance of learning to adapt your style to your audience. You got to adapt to think like a child to get a child to pay attention. Otherwise, they go, huh, and go off and do their own thing. Okay, and children are not that forgiving. Trust me. Okay, again, through communication, friendliness. Right, in friendships, characteristics such as honesty and kindness often foster trust and understanding. So when you're communicating with others, approach your interactions with a positive attitude. Keep an open mind and ask questions to help you understand where they're coming from. Small gestures such as asking someone, how are they doing? Smiling as they speak or offering praise for work well done can help you foster productive relationships. It's important to recognize what people are doing well and show some friendliness and maybe some compassion. Giving and receiving feedback. Strong communicators are able to accept critical feedback and provide constructive input to others. Feedback should answer questions, provide solutions, and help strengthen a project or a topic. Now, I want you to be very clear on this one, okay? Because when I talk about constructive feedback, I don't mean constructive criticism. The best communicators give constructive feedback, okay? Giving constructive feedback provide constructive input to others, and your feedback should always answer questions, provide solutions, and help strengthen a project or topic. So if you want to give feedback, make sure it's constructive feedback. If you want to give criticism, don't communicate that fear to somebody, because when people give constructive criticism, in my opinion, all that does is it just communicates fear. It tells people, social proof, yeah, you've done that wrong. Yeah, you were right, you were wrong. So my suggestion to people is give constructive feedback, okay? Confidence. People are more likely to respond to ideas that are presented with confidence. There are many ways to appear confident, including by making eye contact when you're addressing somebody. Speak to them, not at them. Okay? Sitting up straight with your shoulders open and being prepared ahead of time so your thoughts are polished. Giving yourself an opportunity to be prepared. You will find that confident communication comes in handy when you're building trusting relationships. And for me, something that's important to me, and I know, Pete, that you asked me about this in the past, is respect. A key aspect of respect is knowing when to initiate communication and respond. There's nothing worse than somebody constantly trying to interrupt somebody, especially when they're in flow, they're trying to get there and communicate their message. And especially if somebody asked them to communicate their message, it may have taken everything for them to dig deep, to become fearless about communicating that message. So it's important that people have respect for the speaker. In Ireland, for anybody who's watching overseas, we have this thing here. We often have what we call a session. And a session is a sing-song. And you could be in any pub anywhere in Ireland, or any home in some cases, anywhere in the country when a session starts. And this brings me back to my childhood. It was respect for the singer. Whether they can sing or not, that's just your opinion. Some people do sing better than others, but everybody can sing. And there was always respect given to the singer, which means everybody else sits there and listens and applauds the previous singer after each person sings. And to me, it's no different when it comes to speaking. Is knowing when to initiate communication and also knowing when to respond. So in a team or group setting, allowing others to speak without interruption is seen as necessary communication skill tied to respectfulness. Respectfully communicating also means using your time with someone else wisely and staying on topic, asking clear questions and responding fully to any question that you're being asked. So again, what I would say to people is practice improving communication habits. Many communication skills are habits that you have developed over time. You got to check your habits. You can improve these skills by practicing new habits to make you a better communicator, that you can communicate fearlessness. Think about the habits and think of how the things that you're communicating to, and where did you learn it? Where did you pick it up? And is it really true? So again, practice new habits and you can become a better communicator. This might include being more responsive to communications when they are sent, reminding yourself to give eye contact, practicing giving positive feedback, and asking questions in conversation. Be calm and consistent. When there is a disagreement or conflict, it can be easy to bring your emotion into communications. Now, this is something that I've seen many times. This one I see when people are driven by the fear again. When there's a conflict or a disagreement, usually it brings emotion. That emotion comes in because of fear. Remember, there's a sub-emotion or the sub-fear, right? The anger comes because of the fear of what? Okay? And if you're driven by fear, you have to remember that it's important to remain calm and communicating with others in the workplace, in your life, in your home, in public, wherever you meet them. Be aware of your body language by not crossing your arms or rolling your eyes. I'm sure you guys have met somebody in the middle of a conversation, whether it's you communicating a message or somebody else, and somebody sits there and just goes and rolls their eyes up to heaven, and you go, whoa, that's complete, absolute disrespect, and it creates a whole pile of fear for the person who's speaking at the time. So, and when people feel fear, they tend to respond or become reactive rather than be proactive. So when you're reactive, you're creating a whole new level of fear through a whole new level of communication, through your body language, through your attitude, through the tone of your voice, through all those things that we said, and certainly some of the words that you might choose to use. Okay? So be very, very aware that you're not being driven by fear. Don't be driven by the fear. Maintain consistent body language and keep an even tone of voice can help you reach a conclusion peacefully and productively. You've all been there, I'm sure, where somebody may have told you, don't raise your voice at me. And you go, I'm not raising my voice at you. Or you might go, don't raise your voice. And they go, I'm not raising my voice. And all of a sudden you have two raised voices, right? So again, and when you do that, what are you communicating? You're communicating fear. Whether, okay, if I continue this here, I can't have an open and honest conversation because the relationship might break down. Boom, fear of being left alone, right? Or if I stop communicating here, I'm going to show weakness, so I'll keep arguing. Boom, the ego is getting in the way again, right? So bear in mind, everything you're communicating can communicate fear or a fearful outcome or a fearless outcome. Choose the fearless outcome. Okay. Again, when you're communicating with people, use simple language, not technical language. For me, unless you're talking to a technical person, a person who's in the same industry as you. People use industry-specific language at times, and most people are baffled, right? Or, I think I mentioned recently doing what we call a data dump. People are dumping data on people, and people they just don't get it. But however, most people are too fearful to actually step up and say, I don't understand. So most people go off nodding their head, and they feel stupid because they don't understand what you just communicated to them. And you go off feeling great because you think they've communicated the right message until you don't get the correct response. And all of a sudden you become angry again, right? So use simple language that everybody gets, not technical language. Okay, so break it down and make it simple. Ask questions. When in conversation with someone, you're showing interest in them by asking questions. So paying attention to your communication. Is it fearful or fearless? I always believe that I work towards being fearless. I have a little article I wrote many years ago, and it's called Who Am I to Be Brilliant? And these words were immortalized by Nelson Mandela in his inaugural speech in 1994 after a lifetime in prison. He was to millions a shining light that many wish to be, and yet who did he have to be, and what did he have to do in order that he could finally have the world watching and listening to his every action? Now, this reminds me of another story that I heard about a proud father putting his 9-year-old son, Johnny, to bed. And Johnny said, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to have a spaceship." And his dad said, "Well, that's great, Johnny. What do you need to do so you can have a spaceship?" And Johnny said, "That's easy, Daddy. I need to go to school, do all my homework, pass all my exams so that I can have a good job and lots of money." And Johnny's dad smiled at the simplicity of all. So he asked another question. "So who do you have to be, Johnny, to end up with all this?" And Johnny said, "Be, Daddy? I'm not sure what you mean. Who do I have to be? Surely if I just do these things, I will have what I want." So how many times do we meet people who clearly know what they want to have or wish for? Whether it's a Ferrari, whether it's a million in the bank. Many people have heard all about having a vision and setting goals. And yes, if it's okay if you want to have a million in the bank. But many people slave away doing things in the hope that sometime in the future they will have the money in the bank. Some actually realize that they need a plan or they need to do certain things to actually end up with the goal. They draw up action plans or to-do lists. After all, if they follow the steps, they will have their dream come true, right? So in many cases, doing the actions from the action plan definitely generates the end goals. I mean, sometimes I wonder, did you really need the action plan? Or was your goal as easy to achieve as falling off a log? Were you following your fears? Maybe you could have done it with your eyes shut. Was the goal stretching you? And did you have the appropriate attitude to achieving your goal? And again, I don't think I'll ever do a talk where I don't paraphrase the great Jim Rohn. He says, we all desire good results from our efforts. Most of us are willing to work hard and pay the price success and happiness demands. But the one thing that determines the level of our potential, that produces the intensity of our activity, and that predicts the quality of the results we receive is our attitude. Having the right attitude is one of the basics that success requires. The combination of sound personal philosophy and positive attitude about ourselves and the world around us gives us an inner strength and a firm resolve that influences all the other areas of our existence. Now, as I read this as who do I have to be? What kind of person with what sort of attitude? With a million in the bank? I have to do certain things or behave like a millionaire if I want to become one. So to have a great life, I have to do certain things and, more importantly, be a great person. Live it, think it, and have the attitude and in fact believe it. And of course, little Johnny, all spacemen have spaceships. Yes, Johnny does have to do the going to school, do his homework, pass his exams so he can have a good job and lots of money. But he also needs to be the spaceman. And why not? For who is Johnny not to be brilliant? Communicate possibilities. Allow people to be so they can do what they need to do to have whatever it is they want to have in a fearless world. Live fearlessly. Be brilliant. Be outstanding. Be amazing. You have nothing to prove to anyone, not even yourself. Back to you, Pete.
It was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I have a couple of questions. You talked about the power of Who Moved My Cheese. Can you give us an overview of what you take from it?
What I take from it is to keep moving the cheese, right? And you know, for anybody who hasn't watched it, it's a fantastic story, and it creates. There's 4 characters in that story, and the characters in the story will probably represent almost everybody in some way, shape, or form. You may recognize behaviors that come from yourself, and you may recognize behaviors that are instilled upon you by other people. And for me, it made me realize that I have the power to choose, always. I have the power to choose to be fearless or fearful. And it also made me recognize certain things. And most people I've shared this with recognize behaviors within themselves that don't serve them. And usually a behavior that doesn't serve you is because you're acting out of fear again. And back to fear being just a memory of an experience rather than the experience itself. But when you move beyond the fear, you find new cheese, whatever cheese means to you. And there is plenty of it out there. Plenty of it out there. There is more than enough for everybody. And there is absolutely nobody in this world who can tell you that you can't be, do, have whatever it is you want. There's nobody in this world can control whether you live in a fearful or fearless world except you. And I think that's a message I got, and that's the message I took from that book. Or again, it's a little movie you can find on YouTube, but the book is a magnificent book, and it creates a lot of conversation. So, you know, be fearless, and that's, to me, I move beyond the cheese every day. The cheese could be the fear, and moves beyond, I move beyond the fear every day so I can find more cheese. The cheese is the life I want. It's the life I love living. And I can live that life fearlessly and carelessly. And I believe I'm an outstanding person. I am trying to prove it. I believe it. And I can say that without the ego. And if somebody tries to challenge me on it, that's okay. I don't care. I'm not trying to prove it to you. I just believe it, and that's okay for me. But thanks you for your consideration, your compassion. And I get back to living my life carefree, fearlessly.
Does knowledge beat fear?
Knowledge is just information, right? And again, we think about it. I mean, it's what we do and how we apply the information and the knowledge. And again, it's what knowledge are you downloading? You know, I mean, if you're going to keep downloading fearful knowledge, and you're going to start buying into that story. So, you know, maybe knowledge creates fear, or the lack of knowledge creates fear, or the memory of knowledge, or the illusion of the memory of knowledge creates fear. You know, knowledge is information. Information really is how you download it and how you apply it to your life. You know, to me, I guess they go hand in hand in ways. I just choose to download the knowledge that serves me best, and to download the information that serves me best, and believe in that, and give myself every opportunity to go out there and be, do, have whatever it is I want to be, do, and have fearlessly. I can do it cautiously sometimes, and that's okay. And that's really important. You got to become cautious in certain ways, especially of those people who live in a fearful world and who want to instill that fear into you. So you approach it cautiously, and again, it's becoming consciously aware of your surroundings, of your environment, of your beliefs, of your behaviors, of everything, and what you're allowing in. And that all comes from the information that you're downloading, in my opinion.
No, it's so, yeah, it makes so much sense in terms of fear. And I suppose I'm open to people who sense fear. You know, they feel the fear, and you've talked about different things. I suppose whether you fear less. How, it's the how of the fear less. Do you is accepting fear, is that more useful? Is it trying to make yourself more aware?
Okay, for me, what I think, I mean, I don't accept fear. Actually, this is me just answering off the cuff without giving it too much thought. Because if I give it too much thought, then maybe I become fearful. So I just don't accept it. I don't, I understand fear. I understand what it feels like to be fearful because I've been there. But I don't accept it into my life. I don't accept fear. Now, I know that's easy to say when you're in this space, and I do understand when people are going through it, because I've been there. Remember, I've had multiple fears in my life, and it's only when I truly let go of that fear that my life began to change. But I had it in bucket loads, right? I could have filled a factory full of fear. So I get it. I understand what people are going through, and I understand how the fear can impact you. And usually for me, it's, one is the environment, and again, the information you're downloading and what you allow to become your reality. In other words, what you believe to be true. And if you accept fear, I acknowledge fear. I don't accept it. I acknowledge that it's there. I acknowledge that it's a possibility, and I acknowledge that people feel it. But I don't accept it anymore. So I certainly wouldn't accept fear. And that's just me personally. People have to make that decision for themselves. But I know when I stopped accepting fear, that things really changed for me. I can look back in my life, in my earlier life, when I never accepted fear. When I was younger, I just saw no obstacle to what I could do. No obstacle. Honestly, it was crazy the things I'd done, right? you know, and I saw no obstacle. And then all of a sudden, people started educating you about fear and about failure. And all of a sudden, you start thinking more about it. And then you start recognizing it more. And you start seeing it turn up in places. And then you accept that, sure, look, people fail. And people, you know, people go through fear. Well, if you accept it, then maybe you're taking ownership of it. I don't know. But I know for me, I'll never accept fear. And you know, Peter, I probably share, I know I've shared this with you before, but I remember when I can look back at my life and so many things I had to overcome. And even in my business life, the challenges I had to overcome were momentous. They were like massive, massive. I mean, people talk about climbing mountains, you know, I mean, my God, I had to climb many mountains to get through what I had to get through. And I remember one time sharing this with one of my peer groups. And actually, well, maybe this is another good concept here, because I was communicating my story. And in the room that day, one of the guys in my peer group who on the outside would have been considered extremely successful. This guy would have had a couple of billion in property. He was living a massive life of fear. I couldn't believe it when he asked me to explain when I shared my story, and of course he brought up other questions and I went through what I went through. And he asked me to meet him for coffee afterwards. And I met with him for coffee, and he sat with his head in his hands on the table. And I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "I don't know if I'm okay." I said, "Okay, well, what are you feeling? What's going on?" He said, "Pat," he said, "how did you keep going?" He said, what you shared with us today," he said, "has just blown me away." He said, "It's blown me out of my socks," he said. "Because I don't know, how did you keep going?" He said, "I'm going through something at the moment. I'm finding it very hard to keep going. I really am." He said, "I'm at the verge of giving up. I'm at the verge of quitting. How did you keep going?" My honest answer, my absolute honest answer, because when people get to know my story and where I grew up and how I grew up and everything else that went with that, my answer to him, the reason I kept going is I didn't know I was failing. Nobody ever taught me about failure. So I grew up most of my life surviving. I was just, every day was just another day of survival. And sometimes you're going to have to survive. You're going to have to move beyond, if you move beyond that fear, you will be challenged, and that's okay. You just got to keep going. And the fear only turns up when you recognize it. And that's why, I guess, Peter, I don't accept fear. I will never accept fear in my life. Because when I didn't understand what fear was, or I understood what failure was, nothing got in my way. Absolutely nothing got in my way. And again, when you communicate this, and I'm hoping by me communicating this, that people start to realize this for themselves, that they can let go of the fear. And if they have to survive, if you've got to work harder, you've got to get stuck into whatever it is, you got to do it, but you can do it. That thing that you're fearing is not your reality, it's somebody else's. The thing that you're fearing going out and going after, if you move beyond it, if you don't accept fear, if you don't accept failure, and I don't mean don't accept it, that doesn't mean that things didn't go wrong. Of course it did. But I use that now as feedback. I've always said that no failure, I just have feedback. What did I learn? What has to change? What can I do more of? What did I learn from this situation? How can I be better the next time? And I make those changes. And I keep stepping up. And I live a fearless life. And I live a fail-less life too. It means I fail less. That doesn't mean I don't fail, but I fail less than I used to. You know, so understand that. It doesn't matter, you won't fail at some things. That's part of your success. It's part of your learning. It's part of your journey. But as you move beyond the fear, you will find that you fail less. So I don't appreciate or accept, should I say, fear. I don't accept it. It's not for me. Thank you very much. You can keep it.
I love, we've just added a word to the dictionary, failless, I believe.
There you go.
I would imagine, I don't know. Yeah, there's so much in that. Just in terms of, you know, you're talking about moving from sort of fear to fearless. I mean, I can't help but sort of potentially draw an analogy between moving from pain driven to pleasure driven. I mean, are the two, and, you know, being careless and careful.
Yeah, I mean, look, Pete, there's no question. My driving force from the beginning was moving away from pain. You know, I was moving away, and I mean this respectfully, because especially for my mum, she was the most incredible woman and still is, and done so much for us. But I was moving away from pain. Now, when I say I'm moving away from pain, it's not that I recognize it as pain all my life, but there was a lot of different things going on in my life, and and as a kid, we didn't have very much, and I was moving away from things that felt painful, if you like. Um, and I wanted to earn money. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to have a positive impact. I wanted to be able to put food on the table. That was our number one thing, is to be able to put food on the table. And because there were times, and I often watch, and I keep an eye on some people on social media, and I look at some people who are out there doing some great things in the world, people who I knew who are out there, still living in the area I come from, but are volunteering their time to support the homeless people and support other people. And I remember one person putting up a message saying, you know what, it came up to Christmas and said, just remember, no matter what your society thinks, no matter what is going on, that not everybody had a turkey on their table, right? Not everybody had, and I remember that, you see. But by remembering that in the past, when I was moving out of that, I wanted to get away from that pain. And then when I made a commitment and I made a statement, I wanted to get away from the pain of feeling stupid. And I wanted to prove to everybody I could do it. So I was moving away from pain. When I was trying to prove to everybody else, I was moving away from pain. Then when I got to proving to everybody else I was capable of building a business with people, I started trying to prove it to myself. Then I wasn't satisfied anymore. And I was trying to prove to myself I kept pushing myself, and pushing myself. And I'm pushing myself away from the pain. And then that change came, I can honestly tell you, that same night. It was like, there's no way of explaining it, right? I mean, some people might think it's a bit like woo-woo up in the air or whatever, but I really don't care, but I'm just going to tell you as it is. It was like, I just, we often hear that saying, that weight lifted off the shoulders. It was like, now, it didn't just happen in an instant. It was the information I was processing up to this point, the things I was studying, what I was believing in. I was studying human behavior at the time. I was really looking at how people behave, how people think, and and what causes, what motivates different people to do different types of things, whether it's crime, whether it's success, I was studying human behavior. So I was downloading a lot of information as well, which was moving me towards that change. But I was downloading that information initially with the purpose of getting away from where I was at. Okay, now where I come from, I want to be people to understand where I come from, where I lived. Yes, it comes with some major issues, major problems. But I'm very proud of it, and I'm very proud of the lessons, and I'm very proud of the people that I've surrounded with during my journey of life, growing up in the neighborhoods I grew up with, as I have had some incredible people, and some of them there are the most loyal and most respectful people you could ever meet in your entire life. So, people, unfortunately, you generally take on an overall vision of an area like that. When they hear the bad stories, they don't get to see the real good. So I want to make sure that people don't generalize and understand where I come from as a great place. I just don't want to go back there for my reasons. I've moved beyond that. I've outgrown certain things in my life, and I've outgrown certain behaviors of, and things I wanted to run away from. So running away from all that area, that pain was what was really a driving force. And there was the fear of being stuck there. This is why I said sometimes they're a positive driving force. However, when I stopped moving away from the pain and I realized I have nothing to prove, that's when I actually started being pulled towards the pleasure, being pulled up. I felt that the universe was pulling me towards something greater. The people I was surrounding myself with were pulling me to something greater, and I believed I don't push myself anymore. I allow myself to be pulled towards whatever it is I need to be pulled towards, to be able to achieve whatever I want to, but also to be able to communicate this to everybody else, or anybody else who wants to hear it, so they can take this information and choose to become fearless also.
I mean, I'm struck by your backdrop as well. I suppose it's standing on the shoulders of your fear it's going to put you somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I mean, this backdrop is called freedom. Actually, that's photograph, and isn't that what everybody wants? Freedom, freedom away from things, freedom to things, to have things. And for me, freedom to me is living a fearless life. To I get up in the morning. I get up some mornings I'm tired. And that's just natural. Some mornings I get up and I'm buzzing. Some nights I could stay up all night. Some nights I just can't wait to get to bed. Right? We're human beings. We experience everything else that everyone else experiences. I see things I don't like. I come across accidents and I get an emotional response instantly if I see someone hurt, and all of that and everything that goes with that. But I in my time, in my space, I'm consciously aware that I am free. I am free. I'm a free human being. I am fearless. I'm careless. I am outstanding. And I choose to be the best that I can be. And that is good enough for me. I'm not trying to prove it to anybody, not even myself. I'm not trying to compete with anybody, I'm not trying to compare with anybody. This is who I am. And I often hear a beautiful lady, friend of mine, the most wonderful Christina Noble, one of the greatest humanitarians this world has ever provided and the world has ever experienced. And she says, I am who I am. And she truly means it. And I can tell you, I am who I am. I'm free. I am happy. I am loved. I am life. And I choose to be. And so can you, if you let go of the fear. And if you allow yourself to receive communication that allows you to let go of the fear, and if you allow yourself even more so to share, to communicate a fearless life with those that are around you, with as many people as you can, because then you become it. And I believe for me, Pete, is I have a purpose in this world. I believe I'm here with a purpose. I believe I'm here to make a difference. I also believe I'm here to enjoy this life and to enjoy my time that I have in this world. For as long as I have it, I intend to enjoy it. I intend to be the best I can be. Will I make some mistakes? Possibly. But I also know that if I make a mistake, I can put it right. If I try something that doesn't go in my favor, I can learn from it. But I know if I don't try it, if I don't allow myself to be free, I might, suffer that consequence of regret. And I know I choose not to. I'm 50 years of age soon enough. I tell you something, what a 50 years has been. Can you imagine what the next 50 are going to be like? I can imagine exactly what it's going to be like. And every day it gets better and better and better and better and better. Every moment it gets better. Because I choose that. Doesn't mean I won't have challenges. Doesn't mean I'll have to overcome things and deal with things, but I won't do it with fear. Therefore, I can be the best version of me.
Any constructive final thoughts?
I thought I just gave it. Yeah, you know what, guys? Just give yourself a chance. Really, give yourself a chance to think logically and to think, where did the fear come from? Ask those questions I had to ask myself. Where did I find it? How do I know I have it actually? That fear you have, how do you know you have it? Right? And you might find yourself going, well, somebody told me years ago. Or I've seen things, and again, I have to be respectful, right? Because, there are some great professionals out there, and there are so not so great professionals. There are some people out there who take on board things that are diagnosed for them, and those that don't. And I've met many people who have been to see a doctor and go, oh, thank God, I now know I have anxiety. Now I know what's wrong with me. Thank God I have something. I have anxiety, or my anxiety, because they've got a diagnosis. And all of a sudden, because somebody as a professional has told them what to have, they take ownership. Be careful what you take ownership of, because that anxiety has been created by an imagined fear, I believe. figure out what that is and let it go. And then where you don't have to have a diagnosis. And then maybe you could come back and have it. I'm happy to give you all the diagnosis right now. My diagnosis right now is you are free. You are freedom. You are happy. If you choose to be. So choose freedom.
Pat, that's been outstanding. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Pete. Really appreciate it.